You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith. You're about to listen to a conversation between myself and David Ellefson. As many of you will already know, David is the bass player and longtime collaborator with Megadeth main man David Mustaine. He's also in Metal Allegiance, and that's the reason for the conversation today. David and I chat about Metal Allegiance's second album. It's called Volume 2, Power Drunk Majesty. Let's have a listen to what David has to say. Here we go.
Hi, it's David.
Hey, David, Andrew Mackay-Smith calling for our chat. How you going?
Yeah, Andrew, how are you now?
I'm plugging away. It's been a good week, actually, for interviews, because I had a chat to, amongst others, Scott Ian yesterday. Now I've got yourself today, and I must say you're both people that I've had on my bucket list for some time, so I'm rather thrilled to be chatting to you, particularly also, too, because I'm a bass player.
Very cool. Nice. Awesome.
I've been following Megadeth, particularly through the 90s. I've got to say, I've tuned out a little bit recently only because you get older and you get other commitments, and following bands isn't something you're able to do as closely as you're able to do it when you've got kids and all the pressures of a day job and all the rest of it. But I've got to say, mate, your material in Megadeth through the 90s was... I've said this a couple of times to artists, but I especially mean it when I'm talking to someone who's in the band, but Cryptic Writings was an album that I must have listened to front to back for about a year and a half solid. So I want to thank you for writing that record, because I don't think you guys get enough credit for what you created on that. I think it's a beast of an album, and I actually think it's the best album in the Megadeth catalogue.
Wow. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it's funny. I agree with you on that. There was a spirit around that album. We were sort of we weren't rebuilding, but it was interesting because, Euthanasia was internationally a very well-received album, but we were disappointed in America. And it wasn't because of the response to it. It was mostly because MTV went away, Seattle music took over. It was just a very weird moment in time, and to go in and Cryptic Writings, we intentionally went, okay, how do we be Megadeth, yet not be a total thrash band all the time, yet have songs that can continue to cross over, to just basically keep our career alive, like, Symphony of Destruction type material. And yet, I think we hit the bullseye. We did a little bit of everything. It kind of was a record that was sort of a third melodic, a third straight up the middle, and a third ripping, And the bass tone wise, as a bass player, it's probably my favorite bass tone I've ever recorded.
Agreed. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It was an album that you lost none of your ferocity, because you're about... I'm going to give you a really big bit of praise here, if you don't mind me giving it to you, but I think you're about the most adept plectrum player or pick player that I could probably point out. Yourself and Jason Newsted, I think, are extraordinary, and both of you never get anywhere near enough credit for your contribution to your respective bands, but you bang on point there. As a bass player who's played along to your material rather a lot, and I'm a fingerstyle bass player, and I've found it rather challenging doing Dawn Patrol, for example, with my fingers. But it's something that I never felt you got enough credit for your contribution, not just to Megadeth, but to heavy metal. But do you think that's changing? Because I notice that when I read forums and blabbermouth posts, I know blabbermouth posts are full of people saying rather nasty things, but particularly about you, I notice you are starting to get a little bit of credit for your contribution musically as a bass player to heavy metal. So are you finding that yourself, or is that just in the ether there and on the internet people are starting to talk about it?
It's funny that, there's some bass players who, are kind of in a celebrity status just because of certain parts and lines and things that they've played over the years. And guys that I grew up with, be it Chris Squire, Geezer Butler, Geddy Lee, obviously Gene Simmons, and I guess, now I'm kind of in that same category because of things like P. Cells, with his Vine, that riff being so
iconic,
played so much on MTV. All it takes is one guy at MTV to decide to use your riff, and suddenly you're an icon. So the reasons why we become famous are often kind of interesting. The course we take, but I think probably one of the biggest compliments I got was when Chris Adler was playing drums in Megadeth, and we were in I think we were in Mexico City playing Knotfest. And he said, he goes, it must be really fun for you in Megadeth because this band has these iconic bass breaks all throughout the set in all of these songs. It's not like you just have one. It's like every 2 or 3 songs, there's this massive iconic bass break where the whole band stops for you to be featured. And I had to stop and think, and I said, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, look, that's not something I have in other bands. So for me, I noticed, and obviously as a drummer, I stop and you play, or it's just you and me playing together. So he said it's really cool. And it took me back to, I think, when, the very beginning when Dave and I first met and we, we were composing the very earliest songs. They weren't even albums yet. I'm talking 1983, early 84. I mean, this is pre-Killing Is My Business stuff. And we would be writing something, and he'd be working on a riff, and he would stop, and he would just go, you know what? Why don't you play this part here? And he would, he even if he wrote it on guitar, he'd say, here, why don't you play this? And I loved it because the early '80s was all about shredding and ripping, and that was everything I moved to Los Angeles to go do, hopefully in a new band, and which is exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
So and it wasn't sort of what Eddie Van Halen had done because he had already done that. So we were doing something very new, something very fresh with this sound that we were developing in Megadeth. And I saw that sound developing, really accelerating past what Dave had even done in Metallica. That first year after Dave was out of Metallica, I saw his musical proficiency really accelerate. And it was great that he and I were together because I was kind of this blank canvas. I had great skills. I could play well. I just needed a direction to go in. And by working with Dave, we formed, a unity. And that, I think, was the beauty of those very earliest, well, basically what kind of became those first 3 records, because some of those things we were working on in 83, 84, didn't even make it onto a record, and some of them even until So Far So Good, So What. So,
wow, okay, yeah. You can hear that.
A lot of material there, that really defined, the sound and the basis of Megadeth.
Yeah, look, I hope you don't mind me asking one more question about Megadeth. I know we're here to talk about Metal Allegiance, but do you find in the audience it's multi-generational these days, a bit like what happened to Kiss and, of course, Metallica, but they're a different beast altogether. They're a behemoth, they're the vanguard or the standard of heavy metal internationally, but Megadeth are there now really as well. So do you find that you've got parents bringing kids to the extent where half of the audience don't know the early material, so the first 3 albums that you mentioned up to So Far So Good, So What, and when you perform them, are you looking out to, I wouldn't say a sea of blank faces, but some of the younger people in the audience sort of looking at whoever's brought them to the gig or somebody around thinking, is this a new song? But it's actually a song from...
I find it the opposite, to be honest with you. That's a good question, because I find that the youngest generations now coming to Megadeth shows are the ones that know about the earliest music. And it really speaks to the strength of that early material. And I think, Megadeth's best path forward is our past.
Okay.
Because it's you see, and I know, look, like when I go to see Sabbath, for instance, when they were still touring, I wanted to hear the earliest stuff. When I go see Iron Maiden, I love when they play The Prisoner and Transylvania and, those stuff off kind of the first 3 albums is like, oh my God, this is my Iron Maiden, and it's so interesting that young fans are really intrigued by the earliest Megadeth material. And I see it on YouTube, like suddenly something will push through social media and I'll see some young kid in a foreign country sitting there with his Flying V shredding through, something off of Killing Is My Business or off of Peace Held. And as much as making new albums is important, and it's important that we create new material and that, it's funny that, and that's why I think the reissue of Killing Is My Business, The Final Kill, was so important, because when in 2010, when we were doing the Rust in Peace 20th anniversary, I started to realize, and I think I had a different perspective because I'd been away from Megadeth for a few years, but very much in tune with what was going on in our culture and with Megadeth music. I was a little, I think, probably a pretty good ear to the street with what fans wanted from Megadeth. And, when I came back, I remember Dave and I having conversations. That's why we ended up doing the 20th anniversary Countdown to Extinction. It's like, look, these are albums that are just the epicenter of the sweet spot of Megadeth. Certainly in mainstream. And one thing that was really clear to me, I remember talking to Dave about it, is that Killing Is My Business was this kind of cult sleeper classic that had just been sort of brewing in the background over all these years, And then I think it was really important that album came out this year with 35 years of Megadeth as a remix, as a reissue, as a repackaging, because there's something hauntingly charming about that album that fans have really started to latch on to. Years.
Yeah, I understand that, because I remember in the mid-90s, I was being very focused on the era at the time, which was Euthanasia and Countdown. I remember getting a copy belatedly of Killing Is My Business, and I remember, that run that you do in Looking Down the Cross, the bass run that you do, that trying to nail that over and over and over again, and just having headphones on and just doing it. So it speaks to the power of that. And the other thing too, it's really interesting with if you don't mind me saying, the forefather, as you are one of the forefathers of thrash metal and heavy metal, really, you get a lot of people going back to those first three albums. I've had really good conversations with artists in the world of black metal, so Satyricon and Enslaved in particular, and the feedback I got from them was that they do get the blank faces about their early material, which I consider classic. Nemesis Divina by Satyricon, a classic, let's just call it heavy metal, hard rock. I know that the cultists out there want to call it black metal or what have you, but it's very listenable black metal music. But a lot of the kids in the audience, or the people that are not of my generation, I'm 40, are staring blankly back at the musicians as they're performing it. But you have the opposite thing. But I understand that, because it's iconic what you guys are doing, and it actually crosses over well outside of heavy metal into popular music culture, as you alluded to, with Peace Cells being the accompanying music to the MTV ads that were going on. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that. So.
Yeah, it's, again, I think it's there's, again, we're blessed that we, we're able to, meet at this moment in time to create this sound. We were the first kids that had punk rock and heavy metal records, and so we brought the energy of punk with the proficiency of metal together and somehow created thrash metal.
That's what you've done. And look, with the 5 minutes or so I've got remaining, it's a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you for opening up about your career in Megadeth.
Yeah,
and the
sure.
like. But Metal Allegiance, look, I must say I was pleasantly surprised, because there is a plethora, a veritable bake sale of various artist albums out there. So wonderful artists that come together to produce an album. And to be honest with you, some of them aren't that good. This one here is. So Volume 2, Power Drunk Majesty. Okay, this time around you've teamed up with Trevor Strand from Black Dahlia Murder. It's a great collab. You've got John Bush, former Anthrax, Armoured Saint. Blitz, one of my favourite interview subjects ever. I love talking to Blitz, and Overkill are a classic outfit, just amongst a number of other collaborators there. So what can you tell us about this album this time around, and how does it differ to the first album you guys released in 2015?
I think that, on this one, a second record, I guess it's kind of like what we did with Megadeth. We did Killing Is My Business was our first adventure. By the time we did Peace Sells, we had figured some things out. We tightened up musically. We learned how each other worked, and we ended up making a better second record. I think it's better sounding, better skills. Very much the same thing with Metal Allegiance. We a second record together. Was going to go one of two ways. It was either going to fall flat on its face, or it was going to be better. And I think what you hear with this is you hear guys who we've got more experience working together. I will give credit to Mark Mengi for really stepping up as a sort of musical director, if you will. I think on the last record, a lot of that sort of fell in Alex Skolnick's hands, and because Alex and Mark live near each other out on Long Island and Brooklyn, they're able to collaborate and be closer to each other to sort of steer the ship. I think the first album gave Mark more confidence walking into this album. Mark was kind of the unknown on the first album because it started with, me and Portnoy and Skolnick writing together. And then Mark came over to Portnoy's house, I think on day two or three of that first session and started throwing some ideas out. We're like, wow, this kid's got some good ideas here. It's got a good sound.
Yep.
And we realized there was this kind of groove style that he had. He was certainly a fan of Pantera. He was a fan of Black Sabbath. He was certainly a Megadeth fan, but he was a finger player, So he played bass different than me. And all of a sudden, he was like, "Wow, this is kind of cool. We can make this work with two bass players, with two guys who play very differently from each other." And so we kind of found this little area because we're four very unsuspecting, guys who musically you wouldn't think would mix, between the four of us. There's such diverse, we come from such different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Mike, prog guy, and Alex is Alex and I are certainly thrash guys, between Testament and Megadeth, but, he's also very much a jazz, educated jazz music.
Yeah. It's a good match, mate. I like you guys playing together.
Yeah, and and then Mengi kind of finding out, well, where does he fit musically? I mean, he's obviously a friend, we get along, but it's like, how does he fit musically? So I think that first album was sort of, kind of naturally defined our roles as the core four, as we call it, and then we decided on this album we wanted to keep the writing as the core four, but also, we wanted to expand. We wanted to limit how many participants we had on this record, but we wanted to expand where we got them from. And I think a big part of that was let's dip over into the European metal gene pool, if you will, and to get guys like Johan from Amon Amarth and Floor from Nightwish, and certainly one of the. You get Max Cavalera, who just, I think, represents heavy metal internationally so well anyway.
Yeah.
That I think this album has this international flavor to it. Whereas I kind of think the first record was sort of like an American band with an American metal sound. I think this one has vastly expanded to a much more international representation of heavy metal.
Okay, mate, I better make this my final question because my 20 minutes is up or thereabouts. Any plans to tour? Do you think you'll be coming down here anytime soon? We are open to doing anything. One of the reasons that I really wanted to drive the bus on getting a second record done is that we initially started as just a jam session on motorboats, on the Maiden Voyage Motorhead's motorboat back in 2014. That led to Portnoy saying, "Hey, why don't we write a record?" Once you have a record, now you have a sound. You've got some original material. And as we continued to play events, do some kind of random touring, and the guys played Bloodstock Festival in the UK a couple years back. All of a sudden, there's like, excuse me, we don't want to go on stage and be a cover band. If we're going to go do this,
let's go have some of our songs, and then we can sure play a few fan favorites here and there. But let's be an artist, because we are artists, every one of us. We're original composers. We're artists in our truest sense. So I really was pushing to get a second record done, so that I think that then opens up the opportunities for us to be able to go do more things together. So once this record comes out now here in September, I think that opens up, and hey, down where you're at in Australia, of course, we would love to go there. In fact, we were actually going to go there for, back when the, sound wave, fell apart. So, we've, again, and so sometimes some things happen beyond our control, but we were actually scheduled to go there, and we'd actually started looking at some festivals and events in Europe this last summer, and just due to some scheduling stuff, we had to, we found a nice window to put the album out. So I think, now that the album is going to be out, I think that sort of triggers all the rest of it and opens up the opportunities for future stuff together.
Cool, mate. Mate, these conversations are always over far too quick as far as I'm concerned, especially when I'm talking to a legend such as yourself. So I just want to offer you congratulations on two things before I do. I was in my very early 20s and I emailed you, and you won't remember every interaction, so I certainly don't expect you to remember this, but you emailed me back and you answered my questions, and you were very congenial, it must be said, and it's not always the case when you're meeting your heroes when you're in your early 20s, as the old saying is. Try not to meet your heroes, but I had a very good interaction with you back then, so I want to thank you for that. And the final thing is, congratulations on carrying yourself so well in regards to your Christian faith. I don't think it'd be easy, and particularly in this world we live in, where I think people in the rock and roll spotlight have certain expectations of them, but you've always carried yourself so well, mate, and I don't think there's a bad word that anybody could say about you online or after meeting you at any one of the meet and greets. And as I said, it's not always like that, but I just thought it was important, if I ever had the opportunity, mate, to share with you that I really appreciated it back in the day, because you don't know what to expect when you reach out to somebody, and also the other thing about the Christian faith. So if it's congratulations that I can afford to you, mate, yeah, there you go.
Yes. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm glad that had an impact on you, and hopefully it does on other people. And I appreciate that. Glory to God on that one. He's good at whipping. He's good at making lemonade out of lemons, like a guy like me. So he did a pretty good job on me.
Oh, mate, you're too modest. You're too modest, mate. So you're an excellent bass player, great musician, and just keep on doing what you're doing, please.
Cool, man. Thank you so much. Great to chat with you tonight.
No worries, mate. Okay, all the best.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks very much. Bye. You have been listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith. That was a conversation that featured David Ellefson from the bands Megadeth and also Metal Allegiance. Thanks so much for listening.